Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 54 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. This show is the Friday, December 28th, 2018 show, the final one for the year. And in this episode, I interview the awesome Lindsay Buroker. Lindsay and I had a fun chat last week, and given that I've been a fan of hers for many years, it's exciting that I get to round out this year with an informative and inspiring chat with her, which we will get to shortly. Because if you've been keeping count, this weekly podcast, which started the first week of January 2018, should be at 52 episodes. But a few things happened along the way to add in 2 additional episodes. As I was approaching the teens, I miscounted and I accidentally recorded an episode as episode 13, realizing after I'd finished producing it that I'd skipped episode 12, so I quickly slapped together that missing episode back on March 23rd, and it became a show where I looked at Arnold Schwarzenegger's 6 rules of success as they apply to writers. Also, just a few weeks back, I recorded a special 50th episode, and I did that in between, obviously, episodes 49 and 51, which were the regular weekly episodes. But that bonus episode was because I wanted to have fun with that nice round number. 50 is such a nice number. And in that one, I entitled it 5 Things Learned in 50 Episodes. So that's how we have 2 extra episodes for the year 2018, the first year of the show. Let's see how 2019 goes. Will it be 52 episodes? Will I throw in a few extra ones along the way? Or will I try to balance things out, take 2 weeks off, and only do 50 episodes? Only time will tell, and you'll have to listen to find out. This week has been relatively slow in terms of getting anything useful done related to my writing, spending time with family and enjoying the holiday season. I've been slowly chipping away at an anthology that I have to hand into the publisher. It's due at the beginning of the year, 2019, and that's a superstition-themed anthology that I'm editing for WMG Publishing. I'm also preparing to read the stories for the upcoming WMG Anthology Workshop at the end of February, where I'm going to be buying for 2 different books this time around. It's going to be lots of fun. I was recently honored to be a guest in this past week's episode of the Creative Pen podcast with Joanna Penn. In episode 408, posted on December 23rd, entitled Tips for Long-Term Publishing Success, Joe and I chatted about patience, professionalism, and other long-term strategies for success as a writer. It was always great to chat with Joanna, and I was overwhelmed with so many positive comments on social medias, as well as emails from authors who reached out to me because they enjoyed the chat so much. I even saw a spike in sales of my books, The 7 P's of Publishing Success and Killing It on Kobo, around the time that the podcast aired and in the following days after it came out. Gee, being on Joanna's podcast is almost like having a mini book pub feature deal. So if you're listening, Joe, thanks for having me on. It's always a blast. I'd also like to thank and welcome new patron Michael Lister to the fold. Thank you, Michael. And thanks to all patrons of the show for your generous contribution to the show. The show's sponsor covers the costs for hosting the show, and Patreon contributions cover both my time in recording and producing the show, as well as help me get some new equipment that I've been able to upgrade to recently. If you're interested in becoming a patron of the show, you can check out the additional content that I post at patreon.com/starkreflections. I recently added the 3rd of a series of Stark Reflections on Other Podcasts, where I play a short clip from something that I found useful in the podcast world. I found it useful, informative, or inspiring, and I offer my own reflections on what I learned from it. Now, these bonus episodes are usually less than 10 minutes in length, and are meant to provide additional content for patrons and also perhaps help you discover other great podcasts that you can listen to, learn from, and be inspired by. Speaking of sponsors, this episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. If you've been paying attention to the latest in publishing news for the last 6 months or so, you'll likely see that Findaway has been working hard at releasing great updates to give authors a voice, whether it's pricing control and increased royalties via Apple audiobooks, additional distribution partners with ebook retailers and libraries, or their new Authors Direct opportunities to allow authors to sell their audiobooks directly from their own websites. Findaway is there every step of the way, including production support for helping find great professional narrators for your audiobooks. And you can learn more about them at starkreflections.ca/findaway. Okay, that's enough about me, about my patrons, and my sponsor. Let's get on with this episode's interview. Now, before we get to the interview, I should note that while we were recording this, Lindsay, who was connected to the internet via satellite, was experiencing a major thunderstorm during this recording. So there might be a few moments during our chat where the sound gets a little funky or sporadic, but bear with us because chatting with Lindsay, who is an indie author publishing veteran, is always extremely valuable. Hey, Lindsay, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for inviting me on, Mark.
So, I've been a fan of yours for a long, long time. I'm really honored and excited to have you on the podcast because I still remember in the early days when I was first moving to Kobo to get started we didn't even know it was going to be called Kobo Writing Life back then. I was a huge fan of yours. I hadn't met you, of course, but I had listened to your very first podcast where you walked through the process of discovering the beauty of self-publishing and digital publishing. And I think by the time you got to episode 10, you had already left your full-time job. It's been 10 years, or 8 years, I should say. 2010 was when you first did this. And you just recently released the 5th book in your Agents of the Crown series. Was that this month in December 2018?
Yeah, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago it came out, and I got to wrap up another series that I left the people hanging and then hopefully do some sci-fi in 2019.
So what's the difference between, when you put out that very first Emperor's Edge novel and the one you just released now, book 5, and the final book in that Agents of the Crown series? What are the main differences between then and now?
For myself or like in the industry?
Well, I guess from your perspective as an author, because you've seen quite a bit of change in the last 8 years.
Right. I didn't, of course, know what I was doing with that first book. And back in the olden days, there wasn't this whole industry to support self-published authors or to take their money, however you want to look at it. So you kind of really had to go hunting to find somebody to do some kind of cover art. I just recently replaced the covers on that series, The Emperor's Edge. But for the longest time, somebody said they looked like historical Indian novels, and they were kind of epic fantasy. So, because it was hard in the early on there was keyboards, and there weren't really too many options for buying advertising and that kind of thing. So, you were just trying to figure it out, and there had been a few success stories, but I didn't write vampire novels or anything that was really, popular or trendy. So I always had to, it was just very much exploring and trying to find buyers early on. And, now I've been fortunate enough to find readers that follow me from series to series, even when I jump over to science fiction, or I have the pen name that I do sci-fi romance with sometimes. So I know now when I put out a book, some people are going to buy it at least. Nothing's going to be so much of a flop that it doesn't cover the costs. And that's a really nice place to get to. It means I can kind of do some projects that just for the love of it now.
Okay.
And I've never been really right to market commercial, but sometimes you're thinking, well, this series isn't selling very well and I have to pay the bills. So maybe I'll end it and move on to something else. Now I have a few, and then some that are just for fun.
So is that one series you were talking about where you've you've left the readers hanging now. Is that because you had to pay the bills and write series that was selling, but you didn't want to leave those readers behind? What was the situation there?
With the ones where, and I'm trying to get gradually caught up with some of the old ones because I think I've got about 3 open that I need to wrap up. I got one wrapped up finally, and this will be another one. And it was a kind of a combination of didn't sell that well, or I just got distracted by a shiny new object, which was like another series I wanted to write. And I'm getting better now at making myself write a series from start to finish before wandering off and starting something else, because I found that I have a hard time going back. I always want to go forward and do something new rather than like, oh, I need to write book 4 and that series from 2 years ago. And I also have so many novels and series at this point that I have to reread everything in an older series because I just don't remember anymore. I have to like get myself back in
Right.
those characters in that world. So it's actually like it's almost like doing research on your own stories. So it's more of a time commitment to work on something older than to just start something new.
And that's because, I mean, you have 10 different series on the go right now, or 10 different series that are either on the go or have been wrapped up. Is that correct?
I believe that could be possible. I've done a couple series with my pen name, 5 or 7 novels, a couple of just standalones. And then under my name, I've done, I think, 3 with at least 8 books. And those are pretty much wrapped up. So I do finish things. It's not that
Okay.
I have a whole bunch that are never finished. But so yeah, I've done quite a bit, and it is getting hard to keep track of their novels over the course of their career. And I imagine they had no idea by the end what they wrote at the beginning because it just becomes a blur.
So I want to go back to something you talked about, writing under the pen name. And I believe what had happened is because you had such a huge reader base, you had a lot of fans following you, and they were following you from series to series. You released under a pen name and didn't tell anyone, because was that you trying to see? Is it like Stephen King writing under Richard Bachman? You wanted to see if he still had it? Were they just buying him because he was popular? Was that what you were doing, or seeing if you could?
I'm totally like Stephen King.
You are.
No, with that, it was a little bit of a challenge to myself because I think it was the end of, I guess it was summer of 2014 when I started writing. I did 3 books and did the rapid release thing, and I didn't tell anyone. And it was part that I wanted to prove that yes, you could still get started today, which I'm not sure where I felt like I needed to do that, because you had people still every year somebody comes on and proves that you can still get started today and make it and do well for yourself. And it was a little bit that, and then they were a little sexier. I split off because I'd had a sex scene in one of my books under my name, and some of the readers complained because I generally hadn't had too much explicit stuff at that point.
Okay.
And it wasn't super detailed or anything, but it was enough that some people were like, I don't really like this, and you don't need to write like this. People love to judge you. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just do that kind of stuff under a pen name. And so that is how it started. But it wasn't too long before I let folks know. I kind of blogged about it as I did it, and was able to get the pen name off. And I remember I think she made 10,000 in the first 6 weeks or something with 3 books. So it was proving to myself and that you could get started now. And I kind of explained what I did. So it's actually easier when you have some experience, even if you're starting from scratch under a new name. You know more what to do. What cover to sell and how to find good cover artists, and what things work as far as selling books.
Okay, cool. And in that first series, I want to go back to the Emperor's Edge. The first series, you said the covers maybe didn't reach the target ideal audience, or maybe at the time the covers were fine, and the covers for that ideal audience has changed. That's one of the elements you've learned moving on, right? The different styles of covers. And when you crossed genres, when you went from fantasy / steampunk to science fiction, what were some of the other changes that you found in maybe even some of the new audience you took on?
For the pen name, or because I also have done science fiction under my name, and that's something I didn't start until a couple years ago. And with that, I actually started a new mailing list because it was a new genre for me. So now I have 3 technically. I have a fantasy one, a sci-fi one, and then the pen name has her sci-fi romance one. So it was actually a chance to do the mailing list right from the start.
Okay.
to be really focused. Like this is my sci-fi series. This is the free prequel you get if you sign up. And I had a bunch of second epilogues and kind of bonus stuff. Because with my regular name, I'd written all these series and I never knew what was bringing people onto the mailing list, which was only just on a back page of my website and basically said, sign up for news updates and new
Right.
releases. So it was a good experience. I still have both lists, and I quickly surpassed the original list with the
Wow.
sci-fi, in part because the series did well, and then just in part because I did it right. All the things that they tell you to do, like, oh, you should have a background prequel bonus novella that, kind of answers a question that people have been wondering about in the series. And I made it exclusive. So you had to sign up for the mailing list in order to get it, which I
Okay.
think was kind of key because if people can just buy it, they'll just buy it.
Yeah.
So that was a couple things I did different with that.
So again, that was one of the learnings, right? It was an exclusive piece just for your diehard fans.
Right. And just having a focused mailing list, which is kind of hard when you jump around and write in different genres. So I guess I would do it again if I started a new genre, start a new list for it. And you can always tell the other people about it later because maybe some of them will follow you over. But it
Right.
does make things a little easier as far as, I don't know, we're recording in December of 2018. If Amazon also bots are here today or not, they've been appearing and then disappearing. And some people are speculating you have to buy ads now in order to get in that space. But by having a real focus to one genre, to just the sci-fi people, you're more likely to get on the right also bots for other authors in your genre than if you just publish it. Like I publish my fantasy and there's my pen name, smutty man chest covers on the also bots, and there's some of my sci-fi and other people's sci-fi romance that I've promoted. So it it's a little tidier if you can write in one genre and have a real focused list like that.
Okay. Now, I'm privy to at least one of your newsletters that I read on a regular basis, and I notice you have a very personable approach. It's just kind of like you writing to a friend. Is that an approach you take with all three of the newsletters? Is it very similar?
It is. I'm just trying to be me. I don't try to put on a professional salesperson persona. I have to remind myself to say a few personal things rather than just like, "Hey, here's the new book." 'Cause I think sometimes by the time, especially when you've done a lot of books, you've launched it, you're like, "Oh, I'm done. I'm moving on to the next project," and then you realize, "No, wait, I still need to send out newsletters and then blog about it and tweet about it, do Facebook posts." But I often, by the time I actually publish the book, I'm like halfway into the next book and possibly in a new series. So I have to remind myself, yeah, you should be personable, talk about the dogs. People love that. It's dogs and cats. Almost everybody has them or has family members that have them. So it's a common ground right off the bat, besides enjoying the genre that you write in and they read in.
Okay. So, this is speaking of things that you have in common with, you have a couple co-hosts on the science fiction and fantasy marketing podcast, and that's been running for a long time. You're in the 200s for episodes. And how is that podcast different from the first one that you engaged in?
I think I had one that you stumbled across. I think I called it Saavy Self-Publishing. And it
Yep.
was just me talking. And I actually think I might have only made it to like 7 episodes. I just found it super hard when it's just you to like motivate yourself to go and produce it. And at the time, I didn't know if anybody was listening. This was very early on. This was maybe 2011. I think I
Yep.
even was before the Johnny, Sean, and Dave from the self-publishing podcast
It
guys.
was actually. I remember listening to it and upset when I didn't get any new episodes.
See, now by doing it with two other people, and we do it, we didn't start out being completely regular, like every Tuesday night is when we record now. In the beginning, we were like, well, we'll just record this week and maybe the next week. And oh, we got a guest, so we should show up next week. But people started listening to it. I think this was 2014 or so, there were more self-published authors looking for the podcasts out there. And so we did start to get a little feedback. Although you know how it is with podcasting, you often don't really get many comments on the blog, and you don't know until you show up to these conferences, like writers conferences, and all these people come up to you like, oh, hey, I like the show, really appreciate it. And you're like, wow, because you see that you get downloads, you go into your stats and you're
Right.
like, oh, like 1,000 people downloaded the episode. That's good. But then you wonder, well, did they actually read it? Or is that just kind of like,
Yeah.
I know I'm subscribed to some, but I only pick and choose whether I listen. So
Right. Well, and yet there's so many too, right?
there are now. Yeah. We're still the only sci-fi and fantasy marketing podcast, I
Yeah,
think.
that's true. So now, as a writer yourself, because you're there and you get to pump your guests with questions and learn stuff. What are the things? I mean, you're a veteran. A lot of people look to you for advice on how to do this, how to write full time. What are you getting out of the guests in terms of your personal growth as a writer?
Every now and then I'll get a little idea or of something new to try. A lot of times it's just being motivated by everybody, like listening to other people's successes and stuff on the podcast makes you want to go work on something new or try something, or maybe just you feel like you're slacking on your word count lately. So 'cause I think I've mentioned before in interviews that I listened also early on to the self-publishing podcast guys, and I remember they were doing 5,000-6,000 words a day. I was like, that is a ton of words. But then you think, well, if they can do it, I could probably do it too. And I did gradually get my word count up. So, I'll do like 5,000 or as much as 10,000 words a day if I'm pushing, if I have a deadline with my editor, or I'm motivated because this was like a side project that was in between a project that was scheduled. So I find it motivating just to hear other people's successes and their mistakes that they've had and that they've managed to overcome. It's always inspiring. I enjoy that more than like when we just get somebody on that they kind of got a little lucky and like a minute into the interview, like, well, this guy pretty much got lucky, so I'm not sure how useful this will be to people. I really enjoy the interviews where it's like their third or fourth series and finally here they got it all lined up and they were able to get some success.
So that hard work ethic and a little bit of luck.
Luck never hurts. I don't begrudge anybody their luck. I am a little, I think, not glad, but I don't mind that I didn't have that great luck right out of the starting blocks. I just kind of,
Right.
with my first series, maybe because I didn't have real awesome covers, it was sort of people trying it. They were like, well, the blurb looks okay. And oh, look, it's free this week. So I feel like I got some really real super fans out of that. It's like people had to actually read the blurb and think it sounded something for them. Whereas I don't know, if you have a really cool cover art, people just one click and download it and maybe they read it and maybe they don't, I don't know. But I feel fortunate to have gradually built up a readership that way. And I just feel like sometimes when you get lucky too, it's because you kind of hit the zeitgeist or the right tropes that are popular right now, and those don't always become super fans. I feel like the romance folks in particular get a lot of readers that just, well, I like billionaire bikers, and that's why I pick up this author. And then they pick up the
Right.
next billionaire biker next week, and maybe they don't even remember the name of the author. Whereas you have something that's a little less, I'll say a little quirky or out there, as long as it's not so out there that it's not commercial at all.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you get those readers, they can't find what you offer elsewhere, so they become the really loyal fans.
Oh, that is really, really cool. Now, so you went from solo podcast to collaboration with two other authors, and then you have written some collaborative, but most of your writing, as I understand it, is solo. Do you have any hankering to try out collaboration in the near future?
My one experience with it was that Authors on the Train with
Yeah.
Jay Thorne and Zach and Joanna Penn. And I enjoyed it. It was a really cool experience. We did the train trip down to New Orleans and hung out for a few days in town and managed to jam some story writing in there. But I was glad that, I was glad the way we did it. We each wrote our own POV character that we made up and kind of meshed it together, which was kind of hard to mesh 4 storylines and get it all together. But it was a good experience, but at the same time, it's not really my thing.
Okay.
I'm very precious about my characters in my world. I did do a Kindle World. They invited me, and I put together a story Bible, and I said people could use my characters if they wanted to. Most people did their own characters in my world, But at that point, I was done with the series, so I was like, well, okay, if somebody else wants to write some stuff, that's fine. But I think I'd have a little hissy fit if somebody was trying to rewrite the dialogue I wrote for a character. And I've heard from several people that to be a good collaborative partner, you have to like have no ego and just be really willing to, cooperate and not be a prima donna. And I am a little bit of it with my characters. I'm a little bit not wanting to share or play nicely with them.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Are you the same way when it comes to the business? So when it comes to your creations, your characters, don't touch, this is mine. Are you the same way? So, I mean, do you have a virtual assistant? Do you have people that help you manage the business aspect of your career?
I've been saying for years that I'm going to get somebody to answer email so that I don't forget when I have an interview on a podcast. But I haven't yet. And I think it's just, some people get kind of lucky where I know like somebody has their sister doing it or their husband or spouse is really into the marketing side. And so they have somebody that's like right there that they can easily chat with and talk about stuff. I'm a little intimidated by having to train someone, so that's half of the reason why I haven't done it, just how much work you would have to put
Right.
into like, this is what you got to do, and here's how I want you to answer the emails. So I haven't yet. That's on the to-do list. But I have an editor, cover designer. I don't try to do any of that stuff on my own. I have
Right.
a audiobook narrator and somebody who proof listens to it. So I kind of do have people. I just don't have like a full-time or part-time virtual assistant.
Now, is that because you're worried that any of your interactions with fans or in social media might seem disingenuous if somebody else is doing the first response?
There is a little bit of that with the email. They probably wouldn't. It'd probably be fine. People would just say, I'd have like a FAQ, frequently answered questions. It could direct people to, but it does seem like I'm not Stephen King. Like are people going to think how snobby? She doesn't even answer her own email. And I don't mind doing the Facebook posts and the Twitter stuff. There's a lot of my personality in what I post and share on those sites, which is not to say somebody else couldn't mimic me and probably do it effectively. But I don't put a whole lot of time into that, so I don't really feel that's a huge hassle. And I enjoy when I put up a dragon toilet paper holder, on Facebook and say, hey, what do you guys think of this? It's great to see the comments and get some interaction going on.
Okay, cool. So in terms of, you got into audiobooks early on, because I remember listening to some of your early novels that were done in audio, and this was before a lot of indie authors were getting into it. Why did you decide to get into that at such an early stage?
Yeah, the first thing I did was my first 3 books in my Emperor's Edge series. I found a production company that found a narrator and created the first 3 for not too much money, for less than I pay now through for ACX stuff. And at the time, there was a site called Audiobooks, and I think they've kind of faded into the woodwork. But they would you would host the files with them, and they would let you do like 1 chapter a week coming out on iTunes, basically like a podcast. And I liked that. And then they disappeared. And so you can still put stuff out there, but you have to do it more on your own now, which is possible. But I did 3 and I'm like, well, if they enjoyed it at that point, they can go and buy the rest on audiobook. But I was just trying to find ways to find fans back then. And I made my first book free pretty early on, and it's been free forever everywhere. So I was happy to try get some more fans through the audiobooks. And I did. I have had people that said, well, they had to buy the ebooks after book 3 because that was all I had produced. And it wasn't really a master plan so much as the narrator got busy. And I was like, well, okay, well, just, let that slide for now. But so it was just, I just believe in putting stuff out there. I love having free stuff out there since the self-published authors, we can't get into the libraries very effectively yet.
Right.
I know there's some inroads, or if I've had people, like specific librarians have requested my books for a specific library, but as far as being available everywhere, people don't have that option. So I don't mind giving away some stories for free. And of course, you're hoping that they'll go on and buy more of your work. But if they don't, that's okay too.
Of course. Just a few more questions to ask you. So I'm just going to throw this out there since you write both and you talk about them regularly on your podcast. If you could only write one more genre, would it be science fiction or would it be fantasy going forward?
It's always the one that you're most excited about your next project. See, I just did a year of fantasy. I did 2 5-book series. So I'm really excited now to jump back into sci-fi. I'm going to take on a project I'm a little daunted by because I'm going to set it in our solar system in the future and try
Oh,
to actually base it on like more plausible science, like based on what we have now, which I am not an expert in. My degree is culture, literature, and arts. So even though I loved Star Trek and Star Wars growing up, I'm just trying to listen to as many podcasts as I can because that's how I enjoy learning. And there's some really great stuff out there, fortunately. So I hopefully will get enough of it right to, because sci-fi is a tough one.
yeah.
That's a tough crowd to please.
Oh,
They
yeah.
want their science, they want their hard science, and they want it right.
So how much research are you doing? And you said you listen to podcasts for the research, so you're picking that up while you're doing other things?
Yeah, I'm basically listening to NASA has a podcast now. There's a guy, Isaac Arthur, he does some really great weekly shows. There are videos on YouTube, but there's also a narrated podcast version. Fraser Kane is another one. He does astronomy focused stuff. I've just found all these guys in the last 5, 6 months since I started getting this idea in my head. And I wouldn't call it hardcore research. I have taken a few notes on episodes where I'm like, oh yeah, I want to use Neptune. That sounds really cool as a setting. So I'm like,
Right.
okay, let me scribble down all the reasons we would actually go there and why my characters might be there. So it's not hardcore research. I'm not going to pretend it's going to be hard sci-fi, but I'm going to at least try to like get the planets in the right order and you know
Okay.
some of this stuff right.
All right. That's fun. That's fun. Um, if you could go back, because you've been doing this for 8 years now, if you could go back and talk to young Lindsay, who was first starting out, when she had that dream of wanting to get, that first book out there, what's some of the advice that you would reach back and give to her?
I guess I feel like I might have had a little more success earlier on if I had nailed it a little more with the covers, because the series itself resonated with readers.
Right.
So that was one thing, especially early on, there wasn't as much competition. So if you had a cool cover, you were, that was kind of halfway to victory. And especially Amazon used to put the top 100 free. It's a little easier to find about the path. I think that sometimes when people do have that early success, they can just disappear after that. I'm super impressed when they don't. We'll have people on the show and, oh, they're still doing well 2 years later, because a lot of times you see where like it was a little bit of luck and they didn't learn enough from it, or maybe it was they got a little bit of a mental block because they're like, well, shoot, I can't do that again now, and then the next book takes 3 years to write. So I'm not too regretful of how the path has gone. It's been I'm always afraid that it's going to all go away. Like I'm a little bit of a pessimist,
Right.
like Amazon's paying really well. That can't last. So I had to save up some money while I can.
Well, that's good. That's good. And so we looked to the past to go to talk to the beginning you. What are you, as we get closer to 2019? What are you looking forward to most in the next 12 months?
I'm looking forward to the new series that I was talking about, exploring that. And I enjoy listening to the other podcasts and seeing what's going on in the publishing world. I've never had that traditional background, so I'm always curious about what they're doing. And I enjoy listening to some of the other podcasts that analyze what's going on. And I always hope that I believe there will always be a way to reach the readers. And even if you end up, okay, I'm going to do a Patreon because I'm not, able to do as much as I want on the store sites. But if you're willing to, I think giving the first book away free is kind of a tried and true tack that continues to work. So I believe some of those things will continue to work, and it's interesting watching what's popular this year. AMS ads. And next year it'll probably be something else. And if it turns out that I can take advantage of it and gain a few more readers that way, I will give it a try. I'm not as into the Facebook ads, some of the guys, but I'm always game to try the new stuff at least, and you never know. But I do feel like it's the old stuff that continues to work. The being on social media, having a mailing list. I I don't write a lot on my blog anymore, but it's a story if I put something up. So I've done a couple, 2 or 3 in the last year of just, here it's free, enjoy it on the blog, and then later on maybe I'll make it a newsletter freebie when I put it in ebook form. So I really feel that a lot of the basic stuff still works, even though you hear a lot of doom and gloom every year. There's some,
Yeah.
The world's going to end. It's too competitive now. There are not any more readers there, but there are more authors in there. So we'll see. I'm enjoying watching it, and just kind of continue my steady path, and hope that everything, you continue to be able to, if you can tell a good story, to find the fans out there and make a living doing this.
Well, that sounds like you're cautiously optimistic for the future.
I try to not set my goals too high, and then you're not disappointed. And if it does better than that, you're like, that was amazing.
Okay.
I actually feel that a lot of people, they come out with their first book and their expectations are super unrealistic. That nobody, and then they're crushed when they don't meet them. And I'm like, well, gosh, why are you complaining? You sold like 100 books for your launch. I sold like 2 with my first novel, and they were the people I knew. It really took me a while to kind of get things rolling.
Well, thank you so much for the great advice and the stories. I hope you have a fantastic 2017, and thanks for hanging out with me.
2019?
Did I say 2017? Did you have a good 2017?
It was a lovely 2017.
Right. Well, I hope you have an even better 2019.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me as a guest.
I really like what Lindsay has to say about being authentic and about being personable. One of the reasons she hasn't hired a virtual assistant to handle her mail, for example, is a concern over not being as personal a thing for her readers. I've been a long-time fan of Lindsay and an early listener to her first podcast, the Saavy Self-Publishing podcast, and I see that she's always been genuine and authentic. I've had the pleasure of meeting her in person multiple times, and I can assure you that the Lindsay that you hear on podcasts, and if you receive her author newsletter, the author that you hear from those newsletters is as genuine and down-to-earth as the real person. Just like she sounds, because she's authentic. She's real. She's personable. I can imagine the struggle with that for her, particularly when a writer only has so much time, and preserving time for precious things such as writing. That can be a real struggle. But I also love how Lindsay isn't too stressed out about it. She is enjoying her author journey, enjoying interacting with fans and interacting with other writers, and making the best of the process. It reminds me of advice that Liz has offered me. It's a process, she says. A reminder that, as tennis great Arthur Ashe said, success is a journey, not a destination. It's how you travel, it's how you journey, it's the steps you are taking and the process of getting there. It's not about the arrival, it's about the getting there. Reminds me of the Rush lyrics from their song Prime Mover. From the point of ignition to the final drive, the point of the journey is not to arrive. Anything can happen. These are some things to think about as we continue on our own author journeys, unique as each of them are. Well, that's it for episode 54, the final Stark Reflection podcast for 2018. Just a reminder that if you check out the show notes at starkreflections.ca, you'll find a survey where you can offer feedback on the podcast to help me to continue to improve it. Feel free also to leave a review, comment on any episodes to share your own thoughts and reflections, or shout out to me via Twitter at Mark Leslie. And a huge thank you to the recent folks who have shouted out to me on social media, left comments, and also filled out the survey. I found it all very helpful and useful. Next episode, episode 55, the first for 2019, will be a solo episode in which I look at things I learned in 2018. I'm going to outline my own personal writing goals. I'm going to talk about the new goals I'm setting for the new year. It's going to sound very similar to that very first episode that I posted back on January 5th of 2018. It has certainly been a delightful year, and I'm honored to have you along the journey with me. Thanks for being part of this. Thanks for listening. Here is hoping that the rest of your December 2018 is fantastic and that 2019 brings you great writing and good Stark reflections. Chat with you again next year.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.